Alien champions froze in shock after seeing the training of Deathworlders. The Hall of the Galactic Conquered was made to impress. It was wide enough to hold cities, with floating platforms that moved without sound and light that changed color depending on who was speaking. The air adjusted itself for every species present, warm for some, cool for others, thick or thin where needed. Everything in the hall was designed to remove discomfort. That was why the silence felt so strange when the human arrived. The announcement system hesitated before speaking his species' name, as if unsure it still belonged in the records. Many of the alien champions had heard stories of humans, but most believed them to be myths, Deathworlders who had burned themselves out. A species too intense to survive a peaceful galaxy. Yet there he was. He was smaller than many expected. No armor, no visible weapons, no glowing markings or enhanced limbs. He wore simple clothing, dark and practical. His posture was relaxed but not careless. His eyes moved slowly, taking in details most beings ignored. The champions watched him with open curiosity. Some scanned him with advanced sensors and frowned at the results. No genetic enhancement, no external augmentation, no natural armor. His body showed signs of old injuries that had healed imperfectly. His heart rate was steady, but not unusually slow. Nothing about him suggested a champion. The conquered speaker, a being of layered light and sound, addressed him. "You are the last representative of humanity," it said gently. "You have been invited to demonstrate the training methods of your species, as is tradition." The human nodded once. "I understand." A platform drifted closer, offering transport to the performance arena. That was where other champions had shown their skills. Precision strength, perfect coordination, mental dominance games, displays that showed years of controlled, optimized training. The human did not step onto it. Instead, he looked around the hall and spoke calmly. "I would like to request a different space." The champions exchanged signals. No one had ever refused the arena. "What kind of space?" the speaker asked. "A neutral observation chamber," the human said, "with recording projection, no comfort adjustments." That last part caused a stir. "No comfort?" a gravity-born champion asked. "Why would you reject optimization?" The human's expression did not change, because it would change the lesson. After a moment of quiet calculation, the conquered agreed. The chamber they chose was plain by galactic standards. Smooth walls, flat floor, no adaptive gravity or emotional stabilizers. The air was breathable but neutral. The lights were white and steady. The champions gathered along the edges, hovering, standing, folding themselves into viewing shapes. Many expected some kind of trick. Others expected embarrassment. The human stood alone in the center. "I will not perform," he said. "Instead, I will show you how humans trained." With a small device, he activated the projections. The first image appeared, a group of young humans running across uneven ground under a gray sky. They stumbled often. Mud covered their clothes. Their breathing was heavy. No one stopped them when they fell, but no one laughed either. They got up on their own. The champions watched closely. "These are children," one telepath noted. "Why are they under stress?" The human replied, "Because stress is normal." The image shifted. Humans in enclosed metal rooms practiced repeating the same task again and again. Each time, alarms sounded unexpectedly. Lights failed. Instructions changed. They made mistakes. They were corrected. Then the conditions worsened. "Why not perfect the system first?" asked an insected strategist. "Why allow failure?" "Because perfection does not exist," the human said. "Failure always does." The projections continued. A human sat alone in a small room, no sound, no movement. Time passed, hours, days. The human spoke aloud sometimes just to hear a voice. He kept notes. He controlled his breathing. Several champions shifted uncomfortably. "This is isolation conditioning," the human explained. "We train minds to stay stable without reassurance." Another scene appeared. Humans gathered around a table arguing calmly while data scrolled past. Their voices rose, then settled. They disagreed, then adjusted plans. No one dominated. No one retreated completely. The champions noticed something strange. The humans did not look powerful. They looked tired, yet they continued. "Why so much repetition?" asked a crystalline champion. "Why not imprint success directly?" The human paused before answering. "Because success is fragile. Skill built through repetition survives damage." As the projections continued, patterns began to form. Humans trained when conditions were bad on purpose. They practiced with missing information. They simulated emergencies where there was no correct answer, only less wrong ones. They taught themselves to keep moving even when afraid, confused, or exhausted. The champions grew quiet. Some began to understand. Others felt something unfamiliar, unease. One champion, whose species had evolved in perfect environmental balance, spoke slowly. "Your training assumes disaster." "Yes," the human replied simply. "But disaster is inefficient," the champion said. "Why plan for what should not happen?" The human looked at the projection, now showing a storm tearing across a human settlement while people moved with practiced calm. "Because on Earth," he said, "what should not happen happens often." The hall seemed colder, though the systems showed no change. The champions realized something then. Their own training removed uncertainty. Human training invited it. Another projection showed humans helping each other under pressure. One stumbled, another supported them without breaking pace. Leadership shifted naturally. No single figure controlled everything. "Why not assign fixed command?" asked a strategist. "Because leaders can fail," the human answered, "so everyone must be ready to lead for a moment." The silence deepened. The champions were no longer judging the human. They were judging themselves. Their training focused on ideal conditions. Human training focused on broken ones. Finally, a champion who had won 1,000 contests asked the question that hung heavy in the air. "Is this punishment?" The human turned to face them fully. His voice remained calm. "No," he said, "punishment is being unprepared." The projections faded, leaving only the plain chamber and the quiet weight of understanding. The champions did not speak as the human stood there, alone, unenhanced, and completely unafraid of their silence. And for the first time in the history of the conquered, the champions of the galaxy felt unsure, not of the human, but of themselves. The silence did not break quickly after the projections ended. The champions of the galactic conquered remained where they were, some floating, some standing, some folded into shapes meant for thought. The plain chamber felt heavier now, as if the ideas shown inside it had weight. The human did not move. He did not try to fill the silence. He waited. Finally, the conquered speaker shifted its light and spoke. "You have shown us training designed for failure. What purpose does this serve beyond survival?" The human looked at the empty wall where the images had been. "Survival is only the beginning," he said. At a signal from the speaker, the chamber changed again. The walls faded into a simulation field, but unlike the comfort-adjusted systems used by the conquered, this one was incomplete by design. Some data streams flickered. Gravity shifted slightly and then stabilized. Information panels appeared and vanished at random. "This is a shared scenario," the speaker announced. "No single optimal outcome is defined." Many champions stiffened. They were used to controlled challenges. This was not controlled. The human was the first to step forward, not rushing, not hesitating. He studied the space as if he expected it to resist him. The simulation began. A distant system alert sounded unclear and unfinished. Energy readings conflicted. Communication channels overlapped. The scenario offered no clear instruction. Several champions waited. They expected the system to clarify itself. The human did not. He made a decision with limited information and adjusted his path. When new data contradicted his choice, he did not stop. He changed direction smoothly, as if change itself was normal. A telepathic champion attempted to map the situation mentally and froze when the data refused to settle into a single pattern. A strategist waited for probability dominance that never appeared. A gravity-born champion adjusted position perfectly, then stopped when the environment shifted again. The human kept moving, not quickly, just continuously. He spoke aloud, not to command, but to think. "This reading is wrong. That one might be delayed. We can't fix everything. So we pick what matters most." The champions watched closely. He ignored some failures entirely. Others he worked around. When a simulated system collapsed, he did not react with alarm. He noted it and shifted his focus. "This outcome is suboptimal," a champion said sharply. "Yes," the human replied, "but it still works." Minutes passed. The simulation did not resolve. It simply continued. For the first time, some champions felt tired. Their minds were trained for perfection, not endurance. The simulation ended without announcement. No victory tone sounded. The human stopped and looked around. "That is human training in practice," he said. "No finish line, just continuity." The chamber returned to stillness. The conquered speaker spoke again, slower this time. Your species trained as if the universe was hostile. The human shook his head. No, we trained as if it was indifferent. That answer caused visible reaction. Indifference was harder to fight than hostility. A young champion, newly inducted and still curious, asked, "Did humans never seek comfort?" The human smiled faintly. "We did. That is why we train not to depend on it." The champions began to speak among themselves, not in challenge but in reflection. Their worlds were stable. Their histories were controlled. Their training systems removed pain, uncertainty, and long-term strain. Humanity had removed none of it. "Your world destroyed itself," a champion said, not accusing, simply stating recorded fact. "Yes," the human replied. "Then why did your training not save you?" The human did not answer immediately. He looked at his hands, scarred and imperfect. "It did," he said quietly. "It saved what mattered." The champions leaned in. "Our cities fell," he continued. "Our planet burned. But our people endured long enough to leave records, knowledge, warnings. We trained not to preserve buildings. We trained to preserve understanding." The speaker's light dimmed slightly, a sign of deep processing. "And you?" it asked. "Why are you here?" The human looked up. "Because someone had to remember." The words settled into the chamber like dust. One by one, the champions began to realize the truth that had been forming since part 1. Humanity was not dangerous because it was violent. Humanity was dangerous because it refused to stop learning under pressure. The conquered speaker issued a quiet command. Records across the network updated. The classification of Deathworlders shifted, not removed, redefined. The new definition spread quickly. A Deathworlder was not a creature of destruction. A Deathworlder was a species shaped by constant uncertainty and still functional. The champions stood in silence as the update finalized. One champion finally asked the question none had wanted to speak. "What happens now when there are no more humans to teach this?" The human considered this carefully. "Then you will teach each other," he said, "and when conditions worsen, you will remember why humans trained the way we did." The speaker inclined itself toward him. "Will you remain with the conquered?" The human looked around the chamber at the champions who now watched him not with judgment but respect. "For a while," he said, "as long as there are lessons left." As he turned to leave, the chamber did not feel plain anymore. It felt honest, and long after the last human walked away, the champions of the galaxy began to change how they trained, not to be perfect but to be ready. Because now they understood what humans always had. The universe does not promise safety. So humanity trained anyway. The conquered did not change in one day. It changed slowly, the way deep systems always did, with quiet updates and careful discussion. But the presence of the last human changed how those discussions felt. Where once certainty had ruled, now questions were allowed. The human was given a small living space near the outer ring of the station. It was not designed for comfort, but it was quiet. He preferred it that way. Each day, champions from different species came to observe him, not because he demanded attention, but because they wanted to understand. They noticed small things. He woke at the same time each cycle, even when no schedule required it. He exercised without equipment, adjusting movements when gravity shifted slightly. When systems failed briefly, as they often did in old stations, he did not react with irritation. He adapted and continued what he was doing. Some champions tried to copy him. At first, they failed. A crystalline being attempted endurance training and fractured slightly. A telepath overloaded its own senses by refusing stabilizers. A strategist froze when asked to act without complete data. The human stopped them gently. "You don't train the same way on the first day," he said. "Humans didn't either." That confused many of them. "You were not born like this?" one asked. "No," the human replied. "We became like this slowly." So the training changed. Instead of removing discomfort, the conquered began to introduce controlled uncertainty. Not danger, not pain, just unpredictability, systems that did not always respond. Tasks that changed midway. Problems with no perfect solution. At first, productivity dropped. Then it stabilized, then it improved. Champions began to notice that when something unexpected happened outside training, they reacted faster, they argued less, they adjusted more. The conquered speaker observed all of this carefully. One cycle, it invited the human to a private chamber. "You have altered the function of this station," the speaker said, "without issuing a single command." The human shrugged slightly. "I only answered questions." There is concern, the speaker continued, that your methods will make some species uncomfortable. They should, the human replied calmly. Growth usually is, the speaker processed that. There is another concern, it said. Your species is gone, you are finite. When you are no longer here, this influence may fade. The human nodded. That's why you shouldn't depend on me. The speaker dimmed. Explain. The human leaned back slightly. Human training was never about copying humans. It was about learning how to respond when systems fail. You already know how to do that. You just avoided practicing it. The speaker was silent for a long time. After that meeting, the Conquered made a decision. Human training principles were not labeled as human anymore. They were integrated quietly into standard doctrine. No monuments were built. No speeches were made, that the human approved of. Time passed. The champions who once froze in shock now trained differently. They allowed mistakes. They rotated leadership. They simulated loss without panic. They learned to rest without losing readiness. One cycle, a distant outpost reported a crisis. Not an attack, not a disaster, just a chain of small failures happening at once. In the past, the response would have waited for perfect data. This time, it didn't. A mixed species team acted early, adjusted constantly, and stabilized the situation before it grew worse. When reports returned to the Conquered, the speaker noted something important. The team had not asked for guidance. They had adapted. The speaker visited the human again. The galaxy is changing, it said. The human smiled slightly. It always was. You will not be here forever, the speaker said. Your body shows limits. Yes, the human agreed. That was always part of the plan. The speaker hesitated. Does that not trouble you? The human thought for a moment. It used to. Humans feared endings. Then we learned to build things that outlast us. The speaker processed that deeply. In the following cycles, the human spent more time teaching through stories than demonstrations. He spoke of Earth not as a tragedy, but as a teacher, of storms and mistakes and cooperation under pressure, of learning to continue even when hope was thin. The champions listened, not because he was the last human, but because the lessons worked. Eventually, the human grew slower. His movements remained precise, but rest took longer. The champions noticed and adjusted without being asked. On his final day of instruction, he stood once more in the plain observation chamber where it had all begun. The champions gathered not as judges but as peers. I won't be here much longer, the human said simply. But that doesn't matter. One champion asked quietly, how can you be sure? The human looked around the room. Because you're already doing it without me. The chamber was silent, but it was a different silence than before. Not shock, understanding. When the last human finally left the Conquered, there was no announcement, no alarm, just a quiet record update. Status complete. Humanity did not survive as a species. But it endured as a method. And in a universe that did not promise safety, that was more than enough. The Conquered continued to move, as all large systems did, even after the last human was gone. Ships arrived and left. Delegations argued and agreed. Records updated quietly in the background. From the outside, nothing looked different. But inside, everything had changed. Training halls across the station no longer felt calm in the old way. They were still safe, still controlled, but no longer predictable. Lights shifted without warning. Tasks arrived incomplete. Instructions were sometimes delayed or missing, not enough to cause fear, but enough to require thought. At first, many disliked it. Some complained that efficiency had dropped. Others said the new methods felt uncomfortable and unnecessary. But the results were impossible to ignore. Teams adapted faster. Mistakes were corrected without blame. When something failed, no one froze. The Conquered speaker observed these patterns with deep attention. It compared data from before the last human's arrival and after his departure. The difference was not dramatic in single moments, but over time it was clear. The galaxy was becoming more resilient. One cycle, a delegation from a distant system arrived with concern. Their world was stable, rich, and carefully balanced. They had heard rumors about the Conquered's new training methods and wanted to understand why such discomfort was being introduced when peace already existed. They were guided to a training chamber. Inside, a mixed group of champions was working through a scenario. The conditions changed slowly, not dangerously, just enough to force constant adjustment. The group did not argue, they did not wait for instructions. Leadership shifted naturally as new problems appeared. The delegation watched in silence. "This looks inefficient," one of them said. A champion nearby replied calmly, "It looks inefficient until it matters." The delegation did not fully understand, but they took notes. That was how it spread, not as doctrine, not as law, as example. Across the galaxy, small changes appeared. Training programs began to include uncertainty. Education systems allowed students to fail safely. Leaders practiced decision-making with incomplete data. No one called it human training. It was simply called practical. In one quiet corner of the conquered archives, the humans' records were stored. Not sealed, not protected by ceremony, just available: stories, notes, recordings, explanations. Anyone could access them. Few did it first, then more, then many. A young researcher from a low-gravity world spent cycles studying human emergency drills. She noticed something that others had missed. Humans did not just train skills, they trained trust, the ability to rely on others without perfect information. She shared her findings. Others built on them. The ideas grew. Far from the conquered, a small colony faced a slow systems breakdown, not dramatic, not dangerous at first, just a series of minor failures. In the past, this would have led to delay and confusion. This time, it did not. The colony adapted, adjusted, and stabilized. Later analysis showed something interesting. The leaders had not followed a strict plan. They had followed principles. When asked how they knew what to do, one answered simply, "We practiced not knowing." That answer traveled. The conquered speaker received reports like this often now. Each one reinforced the same conclusion. The last human had been right. Humanity had trained not for control, but for continuity. One cycle, long after the human's departure, the conquered speaker initiated a rare internal review. It examined its own processes. For the first time, it allowed uncertainty into its own decision simulations. The results were uncomfortable and valuable. The speaker adjusted. Not because it was forced to, because adaptation worked. In time, the term Deathworlder faded from common use, not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer described anything unique. Many worlds now trained as if conditions could worsen, because sometimes they did. The galaxy did not become perfect. It became prepared, and that made all the difference. In the archives, the human's final note remained unchanged. It was simple, written in basic language without drama. "We train because the universe does not care. If you keep going anyway, you can build things that last." No signature, no name, just the method.